Hello and welcome back to live coverage of the Apex Gaming $5,000 Standard Open here in sunny Caldwell, Ohio. I'm Todd Tandy Anderson, joined by Ross Merriam. Say hi, Ross.
Hi, Ross.
We got 5 rounds down, 2 more of Swiss and the top 8 to bring you, so we are officially past the halfway point, Ross.
Well, we're at the halfway point.
No, we're past it. We just rolled over.
We play 5 rounds. We have 5 rounds left.
But there's time in between the end of the last round and the start of this round, and that time is elapsing right now as
There's
we
also
speak.
extra time after the end of the Swiss before the top 8.
Okay, you got me. You got me. 5 rounds down, 2 more Swiss and top 8 to bring you. This one we got a doozy. Give us the rundown, Ross.
We have reached the business end of the tournament, as
Yeah.
I like to call it.
Where you start seeing the real players playing the real decks.
This is where we start seeing the players try to lock their spot into the top 8. We have 3 players who are 5-0. 2 of them are likely going to be drawing against each other. One of them paired down to a 4-0-1. We, however, are going to be watching some 4-1s battle it out, try to get to a spot where maybe they can draw next round. And we had 105 players, which is pretty big for a 7-round event, so I don't think a lot of our X1s are going to be able to draw,
Yeah.
but we'll see how that plays out next round. Either way, all of our players in the feature match area this round know they have to win.
Yeah,
At 4
back
and
against
2,
the wall. X and 2 is dead.
yeah, likely out. So, and we're going to be watching 2 of our better-known players here on the Apex series. It's Ryan Hayes versus Josh Moscow.
Hell of
Now,
a match.
we saw Ryan Hayes earlier today in round 1, actually. We caught the very tail end of his match against Abzan Roots. That was Lou Kuhar. And Hayes actually lost that match. So he's working from a round 1 loss, has rattled off 4 wins in a row, trying to do the full comeback to make this top 8. He's on Esper Pixie, his opponent Josh Moscow on Dimir Bounce. So both players bringing Storm Chaser's talent and nowhere to run, and this town ain't big enough, but some slight differences in their decks. I will say, normally we think of the Esper Bounce deck as the more aggressive one because of Optimistic Scavenger. But Hayes' list only 2 scavengers, has the full 4 copies of stock up in the main.
Whoa.
I think that is critical for this matchup. It means that Hayes' sources of card advantage are more reliable than Moscow's. Moscow is still on Kaito plus Enduring Curiosity.
Okay.
So if Hayes can keep Moscow off of those cards and then use his stock ups to pull ahead, he's actually going to be favored in the long game, even though he is ostensibly on the more aggressive deck. This is a very grindy mirror. We're in for some long games, and it really is about who is able to generate more card advantage and who is able to leverage their This Town Ain't Big Enough's and Storm Chaser's talents to greater effect. That's another way stock up is quite valuable. Rebuying it
Finds
with
the good
talent
stuff.
is awesome.
That's true too. All right, well, the players are seated and ready in the feature match area. So, without waiting any longer, let's head on down for round number 6. Ryan Hayes on Esper Pixie versus Josh Moscow on Dimir Bounce. Hayes going to be on your left, and Moscow going to be on your right. Looks like we got a burst sleeve. I'm going to swap those out real quick, but we are good to go, just like the Crunchwrap Supreme.
Looks like Hayes on the play.
Seachrome Coast, no 1-drop. Moscow turn 1 has Storm Chaser's talent. It's Otter time.
Oof. No black mana here for Hayes and no play on turn 2, so it's not going to be a nowhere to run here on the end step. Seems like a very slow hand for him.
All right, what kind of options does he have for just blue and white mana and 2 at instant speed?
This town ain't big enough, and he can't cast that because he has no permanence of his own. Could have been a Destroy Evil on the talent. That was about it.
Okay, land 3 though. Here's stock up on the play. Pretty good. We're going to be digging maybe for a black source, maybe for something else that's missing.
The problem here is now he has given Moscow a window to land a Kaito. So Moscow has Kaito in hand, has 3 in the main deck. Hayes is even on card advantage, since the Kaito will draw an extra card as well, just like the stock up, but very behind on tempo.
Yeah, and the Kaito is like not easy to kill. Best way they do in the Esper Pixie deck is usually attacking it with Optimistic Scavenger and a bunch of tutus.
You can bounce it with This Town Ain't Big Enough, especially because Moscow won't have another creature on the battlefield. That could be effective. Looks like, fortunately for Ryan Hayes, no Kaito coming for Josh
Yeah,
Moscow.
you think he's breathing a sigh of relief over there?
little bit of an awkward discard. Hayes pitching the Restless Anchorage. Has 3 blue-white lands in play. Would really like one of them to be an Anchorage. That can be an important card going along as well.
Yeah. Main phase, this town ain't big enough to pump the otter. We're going to return Storm Chaser talent and the Waking Nightmare back to hand, dealing an extra damage. I'm going to send it back to Hayes. Let's see what Hayes has up his sleeve.
Yeah. The double bounce my own permanent is a very common tactic in the bounce mirrors, since your opponent is usually only playing things that they want to bounce anyway.
Yeah.
And so now this town ain't big enough really just becomes a source of card advantage. You get back 2 cards that can then be worth a card.
When Pixie first popped out at the regional championship earlier this year, it was like, this town ain't big enough was a card that in my brain was coded to bounce my thing, bounce your thing. And the moment I saw a good player bounce 2 of their own things, I was just like taken aback. I was like, oh, that's what this deck is about. That's what we're doing. We're just making sure that we can continuously keep the engine running.
Okay, so Hayes just hard casting a Kaido on his previous turn, uses it to lock down the Otter, protecting the Kaido, and now Moscow is the one who is under the gun to try to answer a Planeswalker. Needs another threat, and I'm not sure he has one. I guess he does have the rebought talent.
Yes.
That'll make another Otter. And there's a Soulstone Sanctuary. That is also quite good at attacking Planeswalkers.
Plenty of pressure. Okay, 2 mana. We're going to, this town, go ahead and bounce the Kaido and the Waking Nightmare. And then probably Prowess.
Talent.
No, going to Waking Nightmare. Choosing to use the mana that way. Maybe just uninterested in attacking anytime soon and just wanting to make sure you can bounce and play over and over again.
Yeah, and with Hayes already down to 9, Hopeless Nightmare is a legitimate plan to close out this game.
Mm-hmm.
When you're the aggressor in this matchup, Hopeless Nightmare becomes very important because it is that source of reach. And it's very clear that Moscow has adopted the aggressive role while Hayes is playing more defensively, trying to turn the corner with this Kaito. Would not be at all surprised to see the Kaido redeployed, though notably the black source that Hayes found off of stock up is a pain land, so that will bring him to 8, which reduces the Hopeless Nightmare clock by 1.
He did have the option to take a Darkslick Shores, but it would have entered tapped as his 4th land, and he's been using this black source basically every turn.
Yeah. And that's another downside of Esper in the matchup. You have the awkward mana base.
All right, so it looks like we made an emblem. That's a hey. Or hi. I don't remember how to say the name. There's a Storm Chaser's talent, and we're going to go ahead and level it up to Chapter 2.
Yeah, and now Moscow has a way to loop Hopeless Nightmare. That's his plan to end this game. He can bounce both Storm Talent and Nightmare, redeploy both, rebuy This Town Ain't Big Enough, and if he does that 4 more times, that's game.
Look, it is a semi-infinite loop over the course of multiple turns. It's something that if Hayes is unable to break up, likely going to end the game. But
Hayes has to worry about breaking that up. He has to worry about these Otter tokens. He has to worry about the Soulstone Sanctuary. He has to worry about casting too many black cards.
All right, here's Momentum Breaker.
Speed 1.
Yep. Another thing we got to keep up with, speed. That way, if we ever get to full speed, we can gain some life off the Momentum Breaker.
Kaido comes in, speed up to 2. Now Surveil 2 and draw. Looks like 2 lands.
Yeah, one's a swamp though, I think, which might be great.
Yeah, swamp, concealed courtyard. Oh, goes for the courtyard and not the swamp, but does Ryan Hayes. Looks like the camera there is frozen, but I'm sure our lovely director Taryn is on that.
Left camera. All right, back to Moscow. This otter can represent a little bit of damage too. And even just 1 damage from this otter means that we need 1 fewer Waking Nightmares cast. I keep saying Waking Nightmare. Hopeless Nightmare, excuse me.
This might be lethal. Hopeless Nightmare is going to drop Hayes to 5, and now you can just bounce the 2 Hopeless Nightmares. put Hayes to 1, and the otter is lethal, even through the life gain from the momentum breaker. But is Moscow willing to go for it and potentially lose the otter to this town ain't big enough from Hayes? And now that would break up the Storm Chaser talent loop since it's already on level 2.
Mm-hmm.
If he goes for talent plus Hopeless Nightmare on the bounce,
Why not just attack first, right?
then
Just attack and see if you get any damage.
True.
Oh, it doesn't have enough black mana, actually. Doesn't look like.
Okay, so it looks like a bounce of Talent Nightmare. Now you can deploy both of these. This is still lethal through the life gain since it's going to be a 5/5 otter. This will be a 4-spell turn.
I was assuming that Hayes had an answer for the otter here, but
Yeah, it looks like he does have a this town, and Moscow's going to force him to use it.
maybe. I was thinking maybe we this town now, and then we just discard whatever our own thing we bounce, like a momentum breaker or something.
Well, I think he's going to need the momentum breaker to answer the follow-up otter. Moscow's going to have a Storm Chaser's talent, another otter. Attack this town, bounce momentum breaker, and the attacking otter. Now the momentum breaker could answer the follow-up. But there is still this Soulstone Sanctuary that the Kaido needs to find an answer for. Top card is just Concealed Courtyard.
All right, momentum breaker. We're gonna swing in with the Kaido. It's currently attacking for 4, I believe.
Yeah. I guess there is now the momentum breaker that can buy you time, or the momentum breaker sacrifice can buy Hayes another turn.
Is it gain life equal to speed?
Yes.
Cool. I love momentum breaker. We talk about Grimbauble a little bit too, but momentum breaker and Grimbauble both excellent additions to the archetype. Okay.
And this is an interesting turn. Does Moscow go for the force sack on momentum breaker, or does he go to continue the this town Storm Chaser's talent loop? I think with an untapped land, he'd prefer to go for this town because that's land 7. It lets you rebuy it, play this town, and play one of the 1-drops that you bounced, either Hopeless Nightmare or Storm Chaser's talent.
All right, Moscow really considering the options here. So many different potential things to do in this otter deck.
Yeah. Talent is so good at letting you use your mana going long. So they just never run out of things to do. See, Hayes is the one who has established the more powerful card advantage cards, the individual cards like Kaido and Stock Up.
Mm-hmm.
But Moscow has used this town ain't big enough and Storm Chaser's talent and Hopeless Nightmare to generate a ton of card advantage over and over again. It's created an engine.
Not to mention just so much damage. I mean, how much has Hopeless Nightmare done this game? Like at least
10?
8? Yeah.
I think 5 of them have been cast.
And each one of them took a card too.
Yeah, because both this towns were cast normally and it's been rebought once. And so I think there have been 5 Hopeless Nightmares.
All right, so he's going to bounce Kaito and the Storm Chaser's talent. I like this play. I think that's a smart play from Moscow. He chose a line. It was defensive, but the momentum breaker means that Hopeless Nightmare is not necessarily going to close the game in time against the Kaido.
Yep. And now Ryan can redeploy the Kaido, lock down the Otter, and still have mana up to sack the momentum breaker.
Might just crack it now and gain 3 life. Maybe you want to get to 7, so you're like 1 above.
I think you want to keep it in case you draw a bouncer, and if you draw nowhere to run, you'd much rather use that to answer the Soulstone Sanctuary, and then still have the permanents in hand in play to bounce. But Ryan says no, I value my mana.
Just costs a lot. 2 is a lot to hold up.
So Ryan up to 6.
Found Pixie. We can do your play. I like Kaido Stun. I think Kaido Stun is great.
We might even see Kaido Stun plus 1/1 Pixie.
I was thinking Pixie might bounce Kaido. Is that sickening?
A little bit, yes. But
now
not
we're
that
thinking.
sickening.
Well, like I said, it seems pretty good, but it's like, ugh, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, you lock down the otter, you pick back up the Kaido, and then if Moscow just comes in with the land Soulstone, you go to 3. Now it's a creature. You can redeploy the Kaido with ninjutsu and lock down the Soulstone.
Whenever I
Okay.
see Ryan make a play that I suggest, I always think that was the right play because Ryan is so good. All right, so it should be 1 stun counter now on the otter.
Yes. And Moscow is just firing up the Soulstone.
Attack for 3. What you got? Probably just take 3, eh?
I don't think there's anything Ryan can do about it. I guess
Chump
other than
block.
chump block, but that really hurts the Kaido, I think.
All right, Ryan, considering his options.
And it's only one Hopeless Nightmare trigger you're saving, right? By blocking the Soulstone, you go for Moscow still needs 2 Hopeless Nightmares to kill you from 3.
Mm-hmm. All right, now we are main phasing, tapping the pixie.
Little awkward there. Could have upkeeped it and kept a stun counter, but it still means the Kaido has to be hardcast.
Yeah.
Is that another momentum breaker? So Moscow can just sacrifice the stunned otter to that if it is. It's definitely concealed courtyard. Ryan's been holding that one for a little while. And then the Kaido we know about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was momentum breaker. It doesn't look great here, but we can tap down the soulstone. We can momentum breaker edict. That's a pretty good turn. We're not dead, I don't think, if we do that.
And you're dead to a land.
All right, well, here's the momentum breaker. Let's see what Moscow wants to sack.
Yeah, sacks the stunned otter. Don't need that one.
Mm-hmm. And here's Kaido, 4 mana. And it looks like we have Spell Pierce for it, so we're just going to zap him.
Okay. Well, yeah, that'll do it too.
Yeah. Ryan's like, you had me anyway. It's fine.
But
All right.
even if Ryan locks down the Soulstone Sanctuary, Moscow's on 6 mana. If he just has an untapped land, he can use Storm Chaser's Talent to rebuy this down, bounce back a Hopeless Nightmare, and cast it.
Yep.
That puts Ryan to 1, and then the Flood Pit Stranner will be lethal. So there were not a lot of cards that Ryan could beat there.
Yeah, I mean, that was just a great showing for the This Town Ain't Big Enough on the Dimir side. You know, Ryan drew This Town Ain't Big Enough, but he didn't have Storm Chaser's talent, and he didn't have Waking Nightmare, or Hopeless Nightmare, so he's just, like, unable to keep up, even though he was playing things like Stock Up to dig for them. As these players reach for their sideboards, Ryan's going to need a little help. He's on Esper Pixie, and what does he have that you think might be coming in against this Dimir bounce matchup?
So Ryan's sideboard is 1 Defiled Crypt / Cadaver Lab, 2 Destroy Evil, 2 Ghost Vacuum, 2 Grim Bauble, 1 Kaito Bane of Nightmares to supplement 2 in the main, 2 No Moralize, 2 Spell Pierce, 1 The Witch's Vanity, and 2 Wiltleaf Liege. So of course the Wiltleaf Lieges will come in to punish opposing Hopeless Nightmares. I also really like Defiled Crypt in the mirror. I said before the match that these games can get very grindy, and Cadaver Lab in particular that have rebuying Nurturing Pixie or Fear of Isolation. Then you bounce the lab, you replay it. It can lead to some incredible late game scenarios where you go from nothing to everything in one draw step.
I have found the Gravedigger synergy with bounce effects has been one of my favorite parts of Magic, and the having it in this deck with just one single card is just so cool.
Yeah. The other option for Ryan is Destroy Evil. It's a card that doesn't have a ton of application, but if Moscow brings in things like Preacher of the Schism, Shielder of the Apocalypse, it's a nice answer to those creatures. Can also hit Fear of Isolation, Enduring Curiosity, and can break up the Storm Chaser's talent loops. Sometimes actually destroying the talent is important for stopping that end game. So it's not a slam dunk in the matchup, but it's definitely something for Ryan to consider.
All right. On the other side of the table, Moscow's Dimir bounce deck. We talked a little bit about what he could be bringing in, but what do you foresee for him?
So Moscow's sideboard is 1 Blot Out, 2 Cut Down, 1 Duress, 1 Get Out, 1 Ghost Vacuum, 1 Gix's Command, 1 Kaido Bane of Nightmares to supplement 3 in the main, 1 Malicious Eclipse, 1 Negate, 1 Preacher of the Schism, 1 Shielder of the Apocalypse, 1 Spell Pierce, and 2 Tishana's Tidebinder. I like the Tidebinders. There's just a lot of abilities that are relevant to counter here. I like the Get Out. Kind of just acts as a 4th or a 5th copy of This Town Ain't Big Enough, because you're generally just bouncing your own things in this matchup. And then the discard spell. I think Duress can be very important, again, for breaking up the This Town Storm Chasers talent loops. They're such an important part of the end game in this matchup. And so that is just a clean way to answer it, because there's usually a window that they give you whether this town is stranded in hand, or when this town is in hand and you duress them, they can't bounce back Storm Chaser's talent, or you take that with the duress.
All right, as these players are shuffling up here for game number 2, Hayes is going to be on the play. They still got some shuffling and some mulliganing to do, so I'll take this time to say thank you to the sponsors for Apex Con and the Apex Invitational Series. We are sponsored by Once Upon a Galaxy, an asynchronous auto battler. It's a fun mobile game. You can find it in your app store today. We'll also provide links in chat for those of you who would like to give it a try. We're also sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is a great deck building website that we've been using here on the Apex series for quite some time, and now it's official. And we are making decks and sharing decks, and that's what Moxfield does best. We're also sponsored by SpiceRack.gg. SpiceRack is a great way to find a tournament near you. Check out SpiceRack.gg and use their search function and play in an invitational qualifier, and maybe we'll see you in November. And last but not least, we are sponsored by Ultimate Guard, the industry leader when it comes to TCG supplies. Ultimate Guard products are at your local game store today. Check out their archive deck boxes and their katana sleeves. Those are my favorite.
Okay, players drawing their opening hands. Ryan will be looking for a hand with a much better mana situation. The Black Source not having any early plays is what really doomed him in that game. It just took a while to play out.
Turn 3 stock up is just like not an acceptable first play or whatever, you know, in a competitive game. Sometimes it's like, oh, you've already mulliganed, you know, like I have to do what I have to do, but might as well just mulligan. Look for a better hand.
Yeah, and you can mulligan in this matchup, even though it's about card advantage. It's about establishing, you know, your engine with this town and Storm Chaser talent. It's about rebuying stock ups and casting them over and over again. So being down 1 card is not at the end of the world as long as you have the right cards for the matchup.
All right, well, players are just about ready, so let's head back into the feature match, and we'll see if Moscow's going to keep this 6-card hand, huh? See a cut down. See a bunch of black cards. Not a whole lot of lands. I'm curious if that's going to be an issue. Hey, he's going to be on the play. Here's Adakar Waste. We're going to go to 19 and play. Storm Chaser's talent. Make an otter. Otter U2. So many otters. Storm Chaser's talent looking quite good.
And there's a pixie drawn for Hayes. But now you're seeing the downside of the Esper mana base. Hayes is dealing himself quite a bit of damage, but he's hoping that this strong opening curve will make him the aggressor in the matchup so the damage won't be very punishing.
I mean, Moscow's defense against this is kill spells, right? And when you're trying to play, you know, these normal removal spells like cut down and go for the throat against the 1/1 prowess tokens that the otter is generating, it's just so difficult to keep up. And one of the reasons why I like Esper over Dimir is because of Nurturing Pixie. This exact draw on the play is so hard to beat.
Yeah, Nurturing Pixie is the reason to be white. It's not Optimistic Scavenger, that's for sure.
I mean, people have been cutting that thing.
Ryan only has 2.
I've been seeing main deck destroy evil. All right, here is Spyglass Siren as the other mana use. We're going to go back to Hayes. Just want to point out, 2 turns, 6 total mana has been spent between both sides to cast 6 spells.
Looks like Ryan does have land 3. So I'll pick up another Pixie. So he could try to press the advantage with another Pixie talent turn. But I think, yeah, he's going to opt to stock up instead. Use his mana a little bit better. Yeah. Still has a good attack after this stock up. Both otters will be 2/2s, so he'll fall to 14 from the Adakar Waste and attack Moscow for 4. Moscow will fall to 12. This is going to be an interesting game. I think a Hopeless Nightmare might play a very key role here because we're going to be racing. It's really hard to contain these otters with spot removal spells, as you noted, and so I think both players are going to attack back and forth, and Ryan's mana base is going to put Moscow in the race.
Starting off with a Surveil.
And it has to have been Hopeless Nightmare because I'm not sure he has another land. Okay, already has a Hopeless Nightmare. So now Hayes going to go to 12, and then Moscow's attack is for 4. Puts Ryan to 8.
Okay. Can we win this turn? Is there a line that Ryan can have? Like Waking Nightmare, this town, Waking Nightmare? Hopeless Nightmare? I keep saying
Yeah.
Waking Nightmare.
Untapped land, Hopeless Nightmare, this town would do it. Because that would be two Hopeless Nightmares, 3 spells. Moscow would fall to 8, and then you'd attack with 2 4/4s. But I think Ryan's 4th land is a Darksec Shores.
Alright, so Nightmare, Pixie, Nightmare. So we're going to be just short, right? Because we don't get the prowess on this town.
And he's going to take 2 damage of his own. So Ryan going to fall to 6.
Yeah, he shouldn't have shortcutted this so quickly. Moscow may have discarded differently.
Yeah. Moscow going to discard Enduring Curiosity and Tashana's Tidebinder. Yeah. Expensive cards he does not have time for, nor the mana.
All right,
So this is actually take 3 damage. So Hayes down to 5. And he can attack Moscow to 2. Yeah, he only sends in 1. So now it's 5 all. And there's the Darksec Shores. A Painless Black Source is key. Ryan.
Moscow wants to draw something so badly. Stuck on 2 lands. Believe life total should be 5 all.
Yeah. Ideal turn here for Moscow, I think, is land this town, bounce the untapped Otter Hopeless Nightmare, play Hopeless Nightmare, put Ryan to 3, attack with 3/3 Otter and 2/2, and then the Pixie has to chump.
Wow, had the Nightmare too, so.
So Ryan down to 3, discards a stock up. But yeah, and you have reasonable attacks. Ryan would probably have to chump your Otter with his own. Because if he goes to 1, it's really hard for him to cast spells. He only has...
Can we get confirmation on life totals?
Moscow is at 5, corrected that, and does come in with both creatures. So the Otter is a 2/2, because Hopeless Nightmare has been cast for prowess. The Siren also a 2/2. Hayes has to block at least one of them with the Pixie for a trade, and it's a question of does he want to chump to keep his life total high enough for him to cast spells.
Yeah.
Given that he discarded a stock up to the Hopeless Nightmare, you have to assume that his card in hand is good. And so then I think chumping makes sense.
I agree. It also means we don't lose to a Hopeless Nightmare next turn.
Yeah,
but
I think it's a this town ain't big enough, and that should be good enough. You bounce Otter, opposing Otter plus Hopeless Nightmare. You play Hopeless Nightmare. Your Otter's a 3/3. You go to 2.
Well, you don't have to. You don't. Ooh. Yeah. Okay. Ryan found it. Moscow didn't have some tricky thing there, and we're evened up at 1-1. Player's gonna take a look at their sideboard, but not gonna be too many changes, I'd imagine, on play and draw. The matchup's like really grindy, you know, just like a lot of back and forth, removal spells, killing things. But
yeah, we haven't really got we got into sort of that late game loop scenario in game 1. That game 2 was more of the race Hopeless Nightmare game.
Yeah.
Because neither player drew nowhere to run.
Sure.
So neither of them had any removal. It was all Hopeless Nightmares and Storm Chasers talents.
Yeah, all gas.
And really the advantage there was to the Esper deck because Ryan had Pixies.
Yeah, and he drew 3 lands, where Moscow only drew 2 and was unable to really do the whole thing.
Yeah, Ryan would have won that game going away if his mana base wasn't 3 pain lands.
Right.
If he even a single, painless land there, fast land, I think would have put him ahead 3 or 4 life, and that would have made a huge difference.
All right. A lot of great Magic so far. Still got Game 3 coming up here between Ryan Hayes and Josh Moscow. Who you got, Ross? Who do you think is going to win? Moscow's going to be on the play.
I am generally going to favor the person with stock up in their deck. I think stock up is so clean and consistent, and this matchup is very much about lining up your draw against your opponent's draw and finding more copies of This Town Ain't Big Enough, Storm Chaser's Talent, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And stock up just gives you a huge advantage. I know Oaf McNamara, who has played a lot of the Dimir bounce deck, tweeted out yesterday an updated list for main deck stock up.
Oh, wow.
So Moscow playing, an sort of older list, probably one he's more comfortable with, but might be missing the value of such a powerful card.
Yeah, look, when Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time first came out in cons, there was a legacy event that weekend, and
Bob Wang was the only person playing Treasure Cruise.
there weren't that many people playing Treasure Cruise or Dig Through Time. I had 2 Dig Through Time in my deck because I thought it was cool.
Yeah.
And then I played against a Treasure Cruise deck, and I got annihilated. Annihilated. But sometimes it just takes seeing it one time, right? Seeing it cast one time in this, Dimir or Esper Pixie deck where it finds Storm Chaser's Talent, Waking Nightmare, Storm Chaser's Talent, plus This Town Ain't Big Enough. And the moment that happens, it's just like light bulb moment. I can never lose again in a matchup that goes long because I have this 3-mana card that finds both combo pieces.
Yeah. Stock up is proving itself across a multitude of formats and excellent in these bounce decks because they have relatively low curves.
Yeah, I played it. I was in the Magic Online Creator Showdown a week or 2 ago, and I got to play stock up in Vintage. Holy! Turn 1, Soul Ring, Mox, stock up. It was pretty fun.
I'm just glad there's a card that in Vintage now that's motivating non-shop decks to have colorless mana.
Yeah.
When Vintage players stopped playing off-color Moxen in their decks, I didn't like it.
Part of you died inside.
Yeah, part of Vintage died.
This is not Vintage.
Yeah, it's about playing Moxen.
Yeah.
But all the curves are so low now.
Even the Null Rod decks play Moxen. Come on. They're arguably the best Moxen.
So it used to be a lot of, intuition for AK or thirst for knowledge.
Yeah, now it's all
Fact or
glaring
fiction.
Flesh Raker, Cavernous Souls.
Well, no, the blue decks are just all, Underworld Breach Luris.
Yeah, that was my deck. It was great. There's also Paradoxical Outcome with 48 of the same cards.
Yeah. That's a nice one.
Costs 4. Stock up only costs 3. Stock up's way better.
Well, Paradoxical Outcome costs like -2.
Sometimes. Sometimes you spend 4 and it gets countered, and you're like, whoa. Okay, players here drawing their 7s. We'll be underway here shortly. See if either player takes a mulligan. Looks like this will be our last match in the feature match area as our other backups have concluded. Okay, let's head on down the match. Looks like we're going to start. Josh Moscow going to be on the play. Darkslick Shores and Storm Chaser's Talent.
That is the ideal. Much better to start on Talent versus Hopeless Nightmare because the Otter represents cascading damage turn after turn. Ooh.
That's the
It's Cadaver Lab for no value. Looks like Ryan has
no.
a weak draw and is just trying to set up a turn 2 Fear of Isolation.
either that or wanting to make sure you can cast This Town Ain't Big Enough.
And deal with the Otter.
Well, no 2-drop from Moscow. Could have Flood Pitch Drowner, though.
Oof. And that's Hopeless Nightmare off the top. Ryan would have loved that last turn.
Right. Look, you got to do what you got to do. We'll bounce that Ransack Lab right now. 2-3 coming in. Moscow, going to kill it. Nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide.
And Moscow in the driver's seat now. Usually these decks board out their Kaidos for the post-board game, so I wouldn't expect that here on turn 3. But is the person who is clearly ahead. Rebuy my talent.
Yeah.
Play it again. Attack you for 3.
Let's get This Town Ain't Big Enough on screen. This town is a generational bounce spell. It is by far my favorite blue spell that exists in Standard. It does everything you need to do. Stops your opponent's stuff, bounces your own stuff, bounces 2 of your own things sometimes. It's a wildly powerful card. Also, for 5 mana, you can bounce 2 of your opponent's things.
Looks like Ryan's draw for turn was a Destroy Evil. That can take out the talent. And Moscow is pretty low on cards in hand. So Hopeless Nightmare going to lead off. Moscow have to discard one of them before knowing what Ryan will do with the rest of his turn. And it is Go for the Throat. So I think there's 2 cards left in Moscow's hand. Have to imagine... Oh, maybe 3 cards. I think one of them is Enduring Curiosity. Oof.
And we do know that Ryan does have Ransack the Lab, so we could have gotten back Fear of Isolation and replayed it, but chose not to. Here's Hopeless Nightmare. Ryan's chances fading. Going to take 2 and discard.
That'll drop him to 14, and there's at least 4 coming across from these otters. Yeah, Ryan was initially looked to put the Destroy Evil in the graveyard, but I think he might need that for the Storm Chaser's talent, because if Moscow's allowed to rebuy this town, the game might be ending.
All right, so Ryan is going to... This town, before choosing to discard, it looks like he might choose to discard the Nightmare.
Yeah.
Needs the land, wants the other interactive cards. I like it. I like that play.
So he's going to fall to 12 from the other otter attacking, and no follow-up play from Moscow.
Well, I think this is all great news for Ryan. Not having the land was a huge deal for Moscow.
He knows there is a nowhere to run in hand. It's 3 total cards. No land drop for Moscow, so likely 2 other spells. I think Hayes picked up a stock up for turn, so that's the play here.
Yep. No counterspell from Moscow. Either doesn't have it or doesn't mind.
I see a Pixie. I see a Fear of Isolation. I see a couple lands in the stock up pile. So I think Hayes is pretty close to being fully stable, and he's definitely up on cards.
Yeah, but that can change in a heartbeat. Moscow does have an Enduring Curiosity in hand, so if he's able to find that 4th land, not only does it unlock the Storm Chaser's talent, but that powerful Glimmer creature comes into play.
I think it might be really come down to hitting the 4th land this turn before Hayes can untap again.
All right, we're going to ransack the lab again, get back Fear of Isolation. We're going to say go. So, like you said, ransack the lab is really doing it, Ross.
It is a very strong card, and it like the This Town engine, it just never stops.
Well, Ryan was under some serious pressure, but has kind of stabilized at 11 life.
Yeah.
Moscow's just a little more expensive, right? The Enduring Curiosity's rotting. All that removal's kind of just looking pretty mid.
Yeah, and if he doesn't hit the 4th land soon, Ryan will establish a battlefield to where the Curiosity isn't that relevant, and just killing it and leaving it as an enchantment is fine. Moscow only has the 1 otter left over, and he does have nowhere to run for 1 blocker, but Hayes has multiple creatures he can deploy this turn. And the nowhere to runs aren't really going to get anywhere because of the Cadaver Lab. Eventually, Ryan is going to rebuy these creatures again and again and again and stock up again. The other thing I like about stock up, it tends to find another one. So like Sphinx's Revelation.
Yes, yes. I really like Ryan's thoughts here, right? He had the option to go for like Fear of Isolation, some other stuff, and was just like kind of choosing to play card advantage stuff because he felt like he had time. But now Moscow deploys Tashana's Tidebinder, and that is pretty scary.
Yeah, I think that's huge for Moscow. Probably not something Hayes was expecting. I think he thought he was in the clear here, but Moscow picked up another threat that he's able to deploy on the end step. And now the Enduring Curiosity is a huge problem. Yeah, Ryan does have This Town ain't big enough in hand, doesn't have nowhere to run. So if Moscow goes for a Curiosity, it'll be interesting to see how Ryan plays This Town. He could deal with the Otter permanently, but give Moscow a card from the Tidebinder, or he could bounce the Enduring Curiosity, stop all the cards, but take max damage. or he could bounce the Tidebinder and give up a card but take the least amount of damage and protect his life total. All three viable options.
So Moscow, a lot of options, all spells in hand. Trying to figure out how to push the most damage. It's been a really intricate match. A lot of stack interaction, a lot of hidden information, right? A lot of things at instant speed, and a lot of really tricky interactions, too. Moscow goes for this town. We're going to target the Storm Chaser's talent and the Waking Nightmare. And now Ryan has to decide if he's wanting to destroy one of these with Destroy Evil or not. He does. He's going to discard Nightmare. Okay. Here's another Otter. It's going to be attack for 6. Hayes down to 5.
Yeah, and now he's really under the gun. He knows there's a nowhere to run back for Moscow, so hard to stabilize this battlefield with creatures. I think if Hayes does go on to lose this game, having that Hopeless Nightmare come on turn 2 instead of turn 1 might really be the issue. If he had been able to bounce that early and take a couple cards from Moscow's hand, he might have had a lot less pressure on him and would have had more room to breathe and been able to leverage his cards a little easier. Now he has to be very, very wary. At 5 life, a single misstep could end this game, end match.
And normally you don't have to worry about getting burned out from the Esper and blue-black decks, but Hopeless Nightmare changes that equation.
Ryan does have a Hopeless Nightmare, but I think he's still only has 5 lands, so he can't triple Nightmare this turn with Fear of Isolation and Pixie. It would be really nice for him to be able to do that and just take Moscow's entire hand and deploy 2 creatures.
Okay, we're going to start with the discard. Discards Gix's command. Pretty far from that one. Needed 2 more mana.
Moscow falls to 16 there.
So we can play Fear of Isolation, return Nightmare, play Nightmare again, and then play Pixie and return Nightmare back to hand.
Yeah, but then Moscow will still have the Nowhere to Run in hand. He Nowhere to Runs the Fear of Isolation, attacks, and you have to block Tidebinder and go to 1, and that's assuming Moscow doesn't top deck anything. If he top decks even another Storm Chaser's talent, game's over.
It's like Ryan is just really behind here. Just looking for any way out.
I think he's looking for a line that doesn't put him at the vulnerable to dying next turn, but I'm not sure there is one.
Yeah, with the prowess from the Otters, I don't think he has a removal spell in hand, right? And the inability to Nightmare as well.
Fear of Isolation back the Hopeless Nightmare.
Oh, okay. Is this just a bluff? I mean, Moscow just has to cast, right? Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. That's 7 damage, even if he kills. He has to have something for the Tidebinder here. Swinging in. All right, we have this town. Going to go to 1. But we have to take a damage to do it. The Pain Land's coming up big time.
Yeah.
And Ryan Hayes can't quite get back in the game.
So yeah, his mana base there just didn't allow him to deploy enough of his cards to play defense. And that Tishana's Tidebinder, I caught Ryan's reaction. I think it really caught him by surprise.
I do too.
And that, he made a play. I think if he knew that there was a Tidebinder, or if it was on his radar even, he would have played that previous turn more conservatively.
Yeah, probably just deployed some creatures, put up some defenses.
I think he wanted to not deploy creatures because he knew there was a Nowhere to Run in Moscow's hand. Right. And so he didn't want Moscow to be able to use that mana. Yeah. He wanted to waste that mana, and instead he had another way to use that mana, and it really put him behind. And he was ahead on a lot on the card advantage metric. I think if he was able to deploy his threats, he's going to take over that game, and he really ended up about 1 turn short of fully stabilizing because of the Tidebinder catching him by surprise. He put himself vulnerable to it, and Moscow had the right draw on that turn.
Yeah,